All right. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you may be, and whatever time you may be watching this presentation. My name is Brian Birdsell, and I'm happy to be here at the 29th Malaysian English Language Teaching Association's conference in 2021. My theme today is going to be looking at advancements of neuro-machine translations and how this is going to be have some impact and really transform the foreign language teaching, particularly, of course, with writing classes. So my outline today is I'm going to first provide a little bit of an introduction, just a little background about myself. Then I'm going to look at what I mean by neuro-machine translations. Uh, then a survey I did with my students just to better understand, for me as a teacher, the technologies that they use in order to complete their English assignments. And then finally, I'm going to look at this kind of what I call a triadic approach to neuro-machine translations in the classroom, kind of three different ways to both minimize and maximize its use in the classroom. So let's start here with a little introduction. I work at a national university called Hirosaki University, which is located in northern Japan. Um, my educational background is both in the US, University of Massachusetts, Boston, and also in the UK, Birmingham. And it's mostly in applied linguistics. I focus on metaphor, mostly conceptual metaphor theory, embodied cognition, and creativity. That said, you probably realize right there that I do not have any background in computer science or machine translations. My approach to this topic is mainly from a pedagogical or practical perspective. I'm just looking at how I, as a teacher, could use this technology in my classroom more effectively. I'm originally from the United States, from near Chicago, about an hour north of the city. But I've been teaching at Hirosaki University now for about 10 years. And you can see the picture down there kind of has kind of the weather right now. It's nice and warm with beautiful background there of the mountain. But this is what it looks like for about 3 or 4 months of the year for people from the kind of the equator area. We get large amounts of snow every winter, at least a couple meters. Um, so if you ever like to experience some snow or skiing, you should definitely come to northern Japan. I've been teaching. I teach primarily in the reading and writing courses, and that's really where my interest in this machine translations kind of emerged from. Is all the work that I do with my writing courses, particularly. I also teach CLIL courses and do some work within the Self-Access Learning Center that we have at our university. So a little background on neuro-machine translation. I think for those who are older like me, back in 1997 seems just like a few years ago. But in terms of technology age, 1997 seems like a very, very long time ago and a very different time, probably. And it was really with this online translation service called Babelfish. Uh, was one of the, I don't know if it was the first, but one of the early forms of free online translation. And it became widely popular to people. Uh, but at the same time, it was really accompanied with these doubts and frustrations. And as teachers, probably most of us know these kind of nonsensical compositions that students began to write with as they relied maybe too much on these early forms of online translations. Um, then in 2006, Google Translator came out with their form of this online translation. But there were still a lot of problems in terms of its reliability. And what are some of these problems? Well, I think some of these problems first are the idea of the translations are often overly literal translations. Uh, they're missing out some of the nuances of the language. They also have great difficulties with idioms or metaphors, especially any kind of creative language. The writing styles also sounds very unnatural, and it has difficulties or it's unable to account for these cultural references that are in the language. But if we fast forward now another decade here and we jump to around 2017, things began to really change within this field of machine translations or online translations with the release of Google's Neuro Machine Translation System. And this was back in September of 2017. And it was reported as being able to really bridge the gap between these human translations and machine translation on the other side, and really reduce the translation errors by more than 55 to 85% by some estimates. And so there was this huge leap forward in terms of technology in this area of machine translations. The one that I will frequently use is actually not Google, but something called DeepL. And DeepL really was released or launched about the same time as Google's Neuro Machine Translator. And over these past 4 years, DeepL has really received a wide range of praise from tech companies, news agencies, and academics. And here's one example from TechCrunch, which is a newspaper on technology. And the main thing here is that these neuromachine translators, especially DeepL, are much better, much more accurate, and most importantly, much more nuanced in their ability to translate between two languages. And this is especially true for two languages like English and Japanese that have a very wide base of corpus data on the internet, particularly on the internet, that these machine translations then can access and learn from. So as a teacher, of course, with the release of these neuromachine translations, I think it's a crucial time for us to really discuss this issue and find really a best methods approach to using it, not using it, type of thing. And so here's some of the questions I've been tackling or thinking about in terms of this technology. When are neuromachine translations appropriate to use for language learning to help learners achieve their language goals? How can we use them effectively in the classroom? And when or if they should be avoided? And so these are some of the questions I've been asking myself as a language teacher, again, especially for writing classes. So this got me interested more in trying to understand, well, where are my students coming from? What kind of technologies are they using to try to complete their English assignments? So I conducted a very basic survey, trying to understand this question more. This was done outside of class. This was completely voluntary. It was done through Teams, forums, and in the end, luckily, I had about 107 students complete this form, this survey. And they're from all these different faculties, primarily the medicine, agriculture, life science, and some others. It was using a 6-point scale, kind of a 6-point Likert scale. And a couple key findings here I'll touch on. The start of the survey, they were just asked some basic questions about, do they use paper and pen still to complete their assignments? And surprisingly, for me as an American, this is quite high percent, almost 90% reported using paper and pen to do their homework, which for me is rather surprising. And as far as a computer, still only a third of them, just under a third, hardly ever use a computer to complete their assignments. And about half are somewhere in the middle, and 15% mention that they often use it. And this is probably maybe a problem with the question. And I asked the computer where I probably should have used this computer or smartphone, because a lot of these students here use a lot more of their smartphone than they do maybe a traditional computer. And then at the end of this first section of just some basic questions was my main interest, and that was, uh, have you ever used machine translations in the past? And about was 87% have reported using it, and mainly they have used Google Translator, mostly for just translating words, sentences, and some also reported using it for internet pages, translating internet pages. And so, of this group, 93 students, I then asked them some follow-up questions about their kind of attitudes and view of these machine translations. And the first one is simply, do you think it's okay to use neuromachine translation to complete your assignments? And most, as you can see here in the graph, would agree that it's okay, completely okay to use uh, use it to complete their assignments. The second question was about, is it the same thing as using an electronic dictionary? And as you can see, most would disagree with this, that there's some inherent difference between these two technologies of a dictionary and an online translator. The next question was simply, is it helpful to you is it useful to you to complete your English homework? Again, I should probably point out all of this was all done in Japanese, they're L1. And that's why I use the word useful, helpful, because in Japanese, the word could kind of mean both of these in English. But this whole survey was 100% done in their L1, in their first language. Again, back to this question is, yes, most of them strongly agree that that using this machine translation is very helpful to complete their English homework, their assignments. The next one is the whole question about accuracy, and still you can see there's this lingering effect that a lot of people still have doubts about the accuracy of translating, in this case, between Japanese into English. And you can see that kind of ambivalence right there, where there's a large number around the 3 and also between the 2 and 4. And so a lot of my students are still somewhat skeptical about the reliability of these translations, and that's probably a good thing. This last one is really the key question that I was really looking at, is asking them, do they think that using these kind of online translation services is a kind of cheating? And again, you can see the wide stretch of responses here. Just a couple, I think that is what is about 3 only strongly agreed, while the majority were kind of in that kind of unknown area of kind of 3, 4, kind of think it's like cheating, but no, not really. And so it seems like the students themselves are also perhaps a bit confused about the use of machine translation. Is it cheating or is it not? And I think also as teachers, we also probably are, maybe if we were doing this question, a lot of us would probably put ourselves maybe in that 2, 3, or 4, not really sure, is it cheating or not? Especially if you're only using it for maybe certain sentences to help you write your essay. And then the final one was a very positive one, especially for us as teachers. And the question is, with the continued improvements of neuromachine translation, it will not be necessary to learn English. And a majority of people strongly disagree that even with new technologies like this, machine translations will still be very important. All right, so that brings us to the kind of the final section here of my talk. And so I became kind of interested in looking at one, perhaps minimizing the reliance of neuromachine translations for my students. And on the other hand, perhaps looking at ways to maximize its use within the classroom. And so I came up with this kind of what I call this triadic approach to neuromachine translations in the language classroom. And it's really kind of based on what Dukar and Schakert call kind of teaching students the abilities that will facilitate independent, lifelong language learning. And the first one is really this idea of focusing on more creative writing. And I'm not going to say that I completely teach creative writing. Of course, this is in kind of balance with the kind of traditional writing for academic essays. But I think foreign language education is often very utilitarian and mechanistic. And that said, writing classes, textbooks I've used almost completely focus on the idea of how to write a well-structured 5-paragraph essay. Some may be more focused on advanced academic essays. Uh, and my point of view is, yes, that's very important, but I also think that introducing students to creative writing, which gives them maybe more agency, a little bit more play with the language, is also equally important. And I think with creative writing, as a result, uh, is often overlooked or avoided as having a utilitarian value. And yet, there's kind of three things here that are, I think, quite important. Here is one is creativity is one of the most important skills of the 21st century, and this has been discussed for at least 2 decades now. It's also on top of the Pyramid of Bloom's revised taxonomy of these HOTS, these higher order thinking skills. And also empirical research also suggests that creativity in the classroom really benefits performance, motivation, and students' own creativity. And so it's really this idea when the focus is on maximizing creativity, it will naturally minimize students' reliance on NMTs. Since really NMTs are ideal for mechanistic writing, but less important for creative writing. And what do I mean by that? Well, stuff that I've done in my classroom with writing, creative writing activities, often is in the journal, kind of a form of a journal. Uh, and I'll often use these divergent thinking tests to stimulate some creative ideas. I also try to teach kind of real world creativity by looking at maybe biomimicry and how that's a really perfect, I think, a great representation of what creativity is. This kind of blending of two ideas together. I'll also use material from visual metaphors because I think that's also helpful because it's visual on the one hand, but it represents what creativity is. Again, this idea of blending two things together. And I'll just quickly show you an example of what I've done before. Here is just a prompt, the one up here on the top left. Imagine a planet that exists somewhere else in the galaxy that is different from our Earth. And then you have to come up with this kind of creature that might be living on there. And then it's a writing assignment where they have to write about this creature. And it's also, they can sketch it out and draw it. And so there's some kind of multimodality there going on here. And again, you can see this student was also using this blending technique of blending a terrestrial animal with that of a aquatic animal. So that's one idea, is that trying to minimize its use within the classroom by really maximizing students' creativity. The second approach is the idea of looking at these kind of teaching intercultural awareness by looking at conceptual differences between the two languages. And here is a corpus example taken from, I think it's a USA Today. And it's a very simple phrase in English, very widely used. These collocations of mind and heart often go together in a sentence. And here's one example. Sometimes you should listen to your heart instead of your mind. And DeepL, put it into DeepL, and the translation comes out. And the problem with this translation, obviously, is that, as you can see, it translates both heart and mind as this kanji kokoro, which would seem very odd to a Japanese speaker seeing it twice in the same sentence. And so you can see these conceptual differences. And of course, the heart-mind being separate probably goes back to early philosophies in the West, from Descartes all the way back to Plato. So we can use this to raise learners' intercultural understanding by analyzing these conceptual differences between the languages that NMT has trouble translating with. You can also look at linguistic changes, and this is something I found interesting. I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'll quickly go over this. And this has to do with, this is just a translation, this Mitsu, and in Japanese is often translated as dense. But again, the translation seems a bit odd in English, a less dense life. That doesn't really make much sense to me. And if you look at dense used within a corpus, it's most likely being collocated with a natural element like a dense forest or dense fog, or numbers of humans like a dense urban area or dense population. But this is kind of showing how languages change over time and how they develop. And this mitsu actually refers to sanmitsu, which in English we might say the three C's. And these became hot words over the last 2 years. This idea of avoiding closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings. And so you can use this in order to really raise learners' awareness of linguistic change and the dynamic nature of language and why perhaps these neural machine translators struggle with these type of translations. And so one way to kind of use it in the classroom is actually trying to break it, try to break the machine translation, and then kind of think about why didn't it work? Why doesn't it work? Why does it have problems with this type of language? Uh, so that's the second one. And the final one here is this idea of critical thinking. And this is really kind of teaching how to effectively use neural machine translations in the classroom, especially, of course, with the classic 5-paragraph essay writing. And trying to get them not to simply cut and paste it and hope that it will somehow magically produce a perfect translation, but focus on a couple of techniques here. And the first one is a simple idea of back translating. And back translating just means this idea of doing reverse translation. So you go from Japanese to English, then you go back, translate into English back into Japanese, and does it maintain its meaning? Also, another technique probably here too is this idea of post-editing, which where you examine the translation and look for errors. And so you do the translation, and then you try to read it and learn how to search for errors within it. And this is really based on this idea of the bad model of neural machine translation, that there are many flaws with it and therefore requires human editing. The one that I think that is probably most useful is this idea of using it as a call tool. And this has been done with Lee quite recently in this study, where the student translates the essay from the L1 to the L2, but then uses the neural machine translation as a point of comparison. And so the student can actually have two translations, one their own and one the machine. And this approach has been shown to have a positive effect on student writing. And so they can kind of compare how they translated compared to how a machine might do it, and why perhaps in some cases theirs is better, and perhaps in other cases the machine's is better. And then finally, I think it really builds up this idea of critical thinking skills and trying to teach these when using neural machine translations. And I think the first one is being aware of the limitations. Do not simply accept that translation is accurate and reliable. Have doubts. Be skeptical of it. The ability to analyze and interpret the translations. Use them as learning opportunities to foster knowledge. Uh, Help you to understand why did they translate it this way. Uh, Take notes. Consider alternative ways to express the intended meaning. And then the final one is this idea of self-regulation, self-regulating oneself. Use the NMT to assist the writing, and the process of writing, but really maintain the agency and the ownership of your own writing, and avoid simply just cutting and pasting as in the simple and easy way of trying to complete the assignment. All right, so this brings us to the kind of the end. I've kind of probably over the time period, but here are my references. I think there are many possibilities of increasing learning opportunities for students to use NMTs, but also there are probably many pitfalls here and challenges. Uh, Most important as teachers, I think it's crucial to know the power of NMT and how it will likely transform the foreign language classroom now and more into the future. Thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you.